Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where Nate has conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez and I am an editor for Latimlist, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on latimlist.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Gonzalo Galindo, the head of Cemex Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of Cemex, a global leader in the building materials industry. They talk about Gonzalo's transition from having a more traditional business background to working in venture capital with Cemex Ventures. And Gonzalo gives advice to younger entrepreneurs on how to approach working with bigger companies, and also talks about the lessons he's learned from working with startups. And finally, they discuss the challenges in the construction industry that led to the vision and creation of Cemex Ventures. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Gonzalo Galindo.
Hey, Gonzalo, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
Thank you for inviting me, Nathan.
Where are you in the world today?
I'm in Madrid right now.
Awesome.
Burning hot Madrid.
Tell me a little bit what you do at Cemex.
Well, I'm currently managing what we call Cemex Ventures. Cemex Ventures is the open innovation arm and venture capital arm of Cemex. We've been created about 3.5 years ago with a clear mandate of really helping Cemex navigate a potential disruption in the construction industry. Cemex, as you know, it's a heavy building materials company. As a building materials company, we're quite exposed to the construction industry. And as such, we created this unit to actually understand much better what the disruption might take place and how it will take place in the construction industry. What are the technological trends, the pain points, what this industry, which is very monolithic and somehow outdated, will experience once different type of technologies, not only different digital technologies, but different type of technologies will start disrupting it. And as such, we created this unit, which we believe it's a very strategic unit for Cemex to really understand how we can move forward the company. And based on that understanding, we start investing in different vehicles like startups, like incubations, and so on, to actually promote that innovation and change to happen.
And do you invest and work with companies in just some geographies or all over the world, or how do you look at that?
We are open to any geography for natural causes because of Cemex presence, very strong in the US, Mexico, Latin America, and Europe. We tend to be a little bit more focused there. But we have also done a couple of things in the Middle East, in Israel. We have a person also in China looking for opportunities, and the Southeast Asia region. So effectively, we're trying to hold the whole globe together, but for natural causes, because of our operations are more heavy in Mexico, the US, and Europe, we tend up concentrating a little bit deeper in those places.
So I'm going to jump into your background a little bit, and then we'll get back to going deeper in Cemex Ventures. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Mexico. I'm from Mexico City.
And did you know that you wanted to get involved with technology during your career, or is it just something that came up?
I'm gonna tell you a small story. It was like going to sleep one day and waking up in the technology world the other day. My background, I was a business consultant in my early days, but since I joined Cemex, I've been doing all sorts of things. I started in the business development area, which was in those days in a consolidated industry, was kind of a mergers and acquisition unit. So I helped Cemex bought operations and cement plants in Egypt, in Philippines, in Europe, in the UK, in Germany, in so many places. Then I shifted towards the actual operation. So I ended up being the line manager, the general manager of Cemex operations in the UK, partially in the US as well. And out of the blue, one day they called me and explained me that this idea of generating this Cemex Ventures concept, which was not clear what was then. All it was known, it was something related to technologies, to digital, to disruption, and the future of the company. And I said, well, why not? I mean, nothing to lose, no? I mean, what you don't know, you don't fear, no?
And talk a little bit about the transition from working kind of on the traditional business to starting to do digital transformation and avoiding disruption of a traditional business. How do you think about that working at Cemex Ventures?
Well, it's definitely a different world. Definitely a different world. Probably the only thing we were certain when we started Cemex Ventures is that we were clueless about what we were doing, no? And somehow that naiveness helped us to actually implement many of the things we thought it would be nice to have in our Cemex Venture idea, no? But certainly it's a very different ballgame, no? It's usually when you work, especially if you're coming from the line operations in a very industrial business like ours, there's plenty of things which are not necessarily repetitive, but you rely on things happen in certain way. You know, you rely on standardization. You rely in certain processes which makes the operation be lean, be efficient. No, while here in the corporate venture world, in the open innovation world, is really about knocking doors and relating with people, having lots of relationships, being fast, being ready to be prepared to whatever is gonna come in your door. No. So it's really a much more different world, no? And on top of that, most of the entrepreneurs tend to be far younger than me, no? And so on. No? So it has been actually a quite a treat for me, and a really pleasant trip for me to actually be part of this adventure. No?
You talked a little bit about the differences between the worlds, and even just the age differences in many entrepreneurs being younger. And we hear a lot about how entrepreneurs should try to, from an entrepreneur perspective, what they should be doing when they want to work with a corporate and they want to work with a bigger company. From your perspective, what advice do you give to maybe younger entrepreneurs who don't have the corporate background about how they should approach working with a bigger company?
Well, there are a couple of things that they really need to pay attention at. No, first one is when the romance starts, when any of the corporate ventures decides to, okay, this is the right company I really want to invest in. Really don't see in the corporation a check. When you're thinking and you're talking about, yes, I found this round with a couple of strategic investors, the word strategic means a lot. Take it seriously. And whenever you are in the due diligence phase, take the time to really understand each other, what that strategic investors in that specific case mean, how this company and this startup will be able to work together and grow together, and achieve certain objectives which are basically tailored for each other to feed each other, no? And that's very important because the clarity at that phase will delineate a lot of what will happen next, no? If you talk to any single corporate venture in the world, one of the common things I've learned and heard around is that it's very hard to connect startups with the operations. Why? Because there's different interests, there are different needs and urgencies and so on, no? But whenever that connection happens, usually great things happen, no? So once you are there, if you have a better plan, it's gonna work better. And if that people which will be impacted by the work of the startup is part of that conversation, it's even better. But in any case, be patient. The speed by which corporations tend to move, just for natural causes, it's not going to be the same as the speed as a startup. No, managing, especially in early stage startup, which might be 4 or 5 guys, 15 the most, compared to a 40,000 people company, we're talking about different shapes, no? And so patience is of the essence, but important is to have clear what is the objective, no?
And let's look at it from the other perspective, from the corporation side. Some of the listeners here are either family offices that own large businesses in Latin America, or some of the executives, and they try to work with startups. What are some of the things that you've learned working with startups that, from an internal perspective, have worked out to be able to have successful relationships with startups?
I think usually corporations need to have a clear question to answer. What is what I'm really looking for? And that sometimes is difficult because sometimes corporations, especially in businesses which are not that affected by open innovation, tend to think in same terms and conditions every time, no? But it's important to be sure that you are really providing a solution that the corporation in itself won't be able to achieve. And in this world of open innovation and disruption, those questions happens everywhere. I mean, probably those are the most important questions to answer in companies, no? And many of those questions, not answers, are the ones which make companies go down, no? So you really need to have a clear question to answer. I mean, what is what I really want to achieve if I get involved with this specific startup? And what is what I want to solve? What is what I want to get out of this one? No? That's something you really need to really have very clear up front.
So let's dig into the decision to kick off Cemex Ventures a couple of years ago. Talk about how that decision came about and the goals that Cemex Ventures is trying to achieve.
Okay, there are a couple of factors which were involved in that one. First of all, I mean, you have to remember that 3.5 years ago, 5 years ago, we were coming, especially the construction industry was coming out all over the place from a very deep crisis from 2008, no? Which took good 6-7 years, depending which country, to recover, no? Those were very difficult years in which most of our competitors and people involved in the construction industry were really in survival mode or very conservative. Suddenly in 2000, I would say 13, 14, things could look better. People start investing. In Cemex, we decided to jump into the digital bandwagon, really renew all our digital capabilities, and not only that, start to create new digital capabilities, as we were convinced that regardless of what of business, the digital content would be sooner or later a very important part, an enabler of the future of any company, no? That's one piece. The other piece was also strategic, no? We saw a different world. Our industry, the heavy building material industries in itself, was starting to change. The construction industry was starting to get some alerts of lack of productivity, of lack of investment in innovation, and so on. So we combined those two factors, and we said, I think this is the right moment to think about a group of people which can actually do something about it without being absorbed by the day-to-day operation, no? And that's why we created and when we created Cemex Ventures, really effectively establishing a group of people without that many strong attachment to the actual day-to-day operation, which would be able to, number one, continuously be kind of the eyes of Cemex outside, continuously look of what is happening to all the related industries which affect our business, construction, supply chain of materials, and so on. What is happening? What technological trends are happening? What is really what the pain points of the industry are? Which are those who are affected by them, and so on. No? Really doing a lot of really strategic analysis for Cemex on where is this industry coming, and what should Cemex do about it? No? And feed that information to Cemex for him strategically think how we should be evolving, no? And also with that information, what we do is provide Cemex Ventures with capabilities to invest in trying things, no? If, for example, we see that there's a technological trend which will be eventually affect Cemex strategically, it's okay, let's have a small fund of money which can help us invest in those concepts and see whether the story is right or wrong, and in the process analyze whether we can make business out of it and create new revenue sources, no? And those investments take place either in startups, usually in startups, usually early stage startups, not seed, but early stage. We also have created our own startups and launched a couple of companies of our own, and sometimes can go a little bit deeper into research, funding research efforts, or even joint venturing with other companies to try certain things, and so on. It's kind of a laboratory from the investment point of view to try things which otherwise the normal business will not be able or willing to do. No, this sounds really way beyond the current operations. On top of that, we also help the operations to actually absorb certain technological advances that will help them continue being efficient and so on. Or for example, using of machine learning or artificial intelligence to maintain our cement plants and things like that. Yes, we help them absorb that, but this is not our focus of investment. Our focus of investment is really more on the strategic side.
And there's not many corporates in Latin America that have decided to do a venture arm. There's many that have tried to do some sort of corporate innovation, but they haven't put investment dollars behind it to actually invest in startups. Why was it important to invest in companies rather than just kind of try to work with them?
I think you need to be part of it, especially in Latin America and especially in our line of business. We haven't, the amount of startups, let's put it the other way around, the amount of startups and innovative concepts that you will find in our business, it's substantially higher in the US and Europe than in Latin America. So really working with startups that will help, especially our operations in Mexico and Latin America, do things, it's going to be hard on one side. No? On the second side, just remember that we're not only looking for the efficient improvement or the operational improvement of Cemex. We're looking for really strategic decisions, really trying to push certain strategic decisions and try to create businesses that probably we are not involved today, no? And help the company evolve. If you really want to do that, yes, you can work with certain of the startups, but at some point you need to walk the talk and put some money where your mouth is, no?
Let's talk about some of the investments that you've made over the last few years. What are some of your most interesting companies that you've invested in?
Well, just recently we invested in a company which is involved in using waste plastics and recycle them into lightweight aggregate to create basically lightweight concrete or non-structural concrete for, you can use it for floors, for waterways, and so on, no? And trying to help the problem of controlling waste plastic. Another good example is a company involved in last mile delivery for building materials. No? Supply chain in construction is probably the hardest problem to solve in this industry. And these guys are really cracking a nut there in really providing a very comprehensive solution which solves especially last mile delivery of certain building materials. We also help a group in Switzerland to develop a energy storage concept, which uses a lot of concrete, by the way. And it's an energy storage concept which is very well tailored for solar and wind power. We have also a couple of companies in which we help manage construction job sites better with visualization capabilities, job site management, and so on. We are also getting involved with different building the construction processes, industrialized construction and industrialized and standardized construction. A company which actually will produce structural panels to build housing faster, cheaper, hopefully. So it's quite diverse. We're doing a lot of efforts in the CO2 arena, in the circular economy front, the future of materials as well. So it's quite diverse.
What kind of stage do you like to invest in? What kind of check sizes do you normally do?
We usually go early stages, not seed. something in between after seed and Series A, I would say. In general terms, we like to see the startups having commercial activity. Somehow it reflects on you're not the only one willing to buy the product. Somebody else is actually buying it. We don't like to invest alone. We usually invest in a round of more than one investor to make sure that we are not the only crazy people thinking this is a good idea. Ticket sizes vary by by geography. If you're talking about Latin America, $500,000 will do. If you're talking about Europe, $1.5 million will do. If you're talking about the US, you really need to start thinking bigger numbers, no? But we usually our investment, probably the largest has been 3 million, the lowest has been up to 100,000. No, I mean,
where do you see the next interesting trends in construction and building materials going? What are some of the things that entrepreneurs should be looking at, or some of the big problems that need to be solved?
There's not necessarily a kind of new trend, but there will be a couple of things happening in the construction industry which will accelerate substantially, especially now after COVID, no? Well, not now after COVID. Now COVID is actually triggering those. Hopefully it's after the COVID, and I would be somewhere else having a beer, but it's okay. I'm here at home. The one is the way we build. I think this concept of offsite construction, industrialized construction, will start to take off more and more seriously in more places. It is something fairly normal in Scandinavia and Japan, but I think it will start really being disseminated in much more places and in different type of constructions. I mean, not only houses, you will see more commercial buildings and so on. No? That's one. And the reason why is because that will start triggering a little bit more of standardization. One of the big problems of this industry is every project is different. So every time you go about innovation, it's kind of innovation a la carte. No? You have to innovate for that project, but the next one might not be able to use whatever you learn. No? So you really need to standardization. That will really push another trend, which is, are the current building materials or the capabilities of current building materials good enough to support that standardization and offsite industrialization of construction? That will trigger some changes there. I will see as well a lot of efforts in materials recycling, improving the environmental footprint, not only carbon, but the environmental footprint of the construction. Waste is a big issue in construction. So I think those will be certainly the big areas. And there's another area which will take a little bit longer, but certainly all supply chain related matters will be affected. No?
If you could go back to when you first started with Cemex Ventures, knowing everything you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a good question. I think we should have defined a little bit better the boundaries between our corporation and Cemex Ventures. At the beginning, if you ask me or my boss, what is Ventures all about? We could give you two different answers, which smell like the same, but were not exactly the same. It took us a little bit of effort to really figure out what we were clear about. We need this entity to do this, but we were not clear about how to go about it, no? And how much we should leverage on the current Cemex and how much we should Cemex Ventures be a free bird flying for the target, no? I think that took us some effort and some training really figuring out. And the other is rely. I mean, if you are to put a corporate venture team, you really need to make sure that you build a good team which has the mixtures of experience in the business and experience in the venture capital in open innovation front. That combination is very important. Otherwise, it's going to take longer.
What does the next couple of years look like for you and Cemex Ventures?
Well, hopefully we manage to attract a lot of good concepts. As you know, for the last 4 years, we've been launching what we call our startup competition. which is we started 3 years ago actually, as an experiment to really try to see what type of startups we can attract, and 3.5 years after, we actually created probably the most important competition in this industry. We have partners today which work with us, like the likes of Hilti, Ferrovial, Vinci, and Saint-Gobain. And hopefully we can take this to the next level in terms of not only the competition, but also starting to do stronger collaboration with partners like them to actually achieve something together. No, this industry is really pulverized. A small house can take 40 different people and different trades to be built. No, just imagine a high-rise building. No, it could be thousands of people with different. So it will require a lot of collaboration and a lot of working together and a lot of faith in each other to actually make this industry change. No? And hopefully in the next 2 years, we take this open innovation level from the company level to a much more wide open industry level. I think that will be the key.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. It's been great to hear how you're starting to do more innovation and investing in startups inside of Cemex. And it's going to be exciting to see how you continue to execute it over the next couple of years. So thanks for taking the time to do it.
Hopefully so, and thank you for having me today.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest Gonzalo Galindo, and thank you to Angel Andraca for producing this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.